Before we begin, a question for you. Have you ever seen someone dance off beat, but somehow right on emotion? Have you ever watched someone bound by rules for too long, suddenly stand up, simply because someone nearby didn't tell them to sit back down? If you have, then this story will speak to something deep inside you. Go ahead, like and subscribe, because today, the most powerful moment in the room wasn't captured by a headline. It was made by someone who chose not to interrupt a silent revolution. This isn't a story about dancing. It's about permission, the kind no one gives, and the kind some people stop asking for. Now let's step into a living room, right before a party begins, and see what happens when a maid does something no one dared to do. There are dances no one ever teaches. And some people, it turns out, just need someone soft enough nearby to feel like they're allowed to move. The sunlight slanted across the living room rug like a silent spotlight. Outside, the garden staff were still arranging the final lanterns for the evening's gala. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and money. The room itself was cathedral high and museum quiet, dressed in cream and gold. It was the kind of space where nothing moved unless permission had been granted. Clara Vaughn sat near the bay window, her wheelchair barely making a dent in the plush carpet beneath her. She was pale and delicate, with a small frame and one foot turned slightly inward. A silk ribbon held her blonde hair off her face. Her legs didn't move the way others did. One side of her body often refused to cooperate, but her eyes danced constantly, fast and wide like someone trying to remember a dream before it left. She'd been told for years to sit pretty at these events. Sit pretty meant quiet hands, a straight back, no spinning the wheels too fast, no reaching for things. Sit pretty meant letting the adults pretend she wasn't aching to be part of something alive. Today, though, something different was stirring. The curtain shifted, just slightly, spilling a diagonal slice of golden afternoon light across the floor. Clara turned her face toward it. Her fingers fluttered, almost unconsciously, in the air. Across the room, Sienna noticed. The young maid was quietly arranging silverware on the long buffet table. She was in her mid-20s, red-haired and freckled, with the posture of someone who once knew how to perform for a crowd. She moved efficiently, but there was something in the way she paused now, forks in hand, head tilted slightly toward Clara, that suggested she recognized the rhythm in the girl's movement. Sienna had once danced professionally. Contemporary. Raw, grounded, body-first kind of movement. That was before a bad landing tore the ligaments in her right ankle and ended her stage life. Since then, she traded spotlight for silence, and mirrors for marble countertops. But some instincts stay close, even after the lights go out. She looked around, no one else in the room. The head butler was likely still inspecting the floral arrangements in the next hall. Vaughn hadn't descended yet. So Sienna paused. She didn't speak. She didn't approach. She simply extended one arm to the side, fingers soft, palm turned toward the light, and let her wrist curve into a slow, deliberate spiral. Her body stayed rooted, but her arm drew a wide, gentle circle in the air. Clara saw it. For a beat, she froze, watching, measuring. Then, with her own right arm, she mimicked the movement. Not perfectly, her elbow jerked a little, her fingers didn't always follow, but it was unmistakable. A duet had begun. Sienna's next motion was slower, more open. She lifted both arms gently, elbows bent, letting them float for just a second before lowering them again. Across the room, Clara copied her. No music played. No one spoke. They kept going. Clara's left side hesitated, but Sienna adjusted, making each gesture softer, more achievable. It wasn't about beauty. It was about matching breath. Being present. Moving with someone, not for them. They moved like shadows in the late afternoon, tracing arcs only they could see. There was a stillness in the room, but it wasn't empty, it was full. Like the air was holding its breath with them. Neither girl smiled broadly, but their eyes stayed locked. Sienna didn't reach out. She didn't touch. But in that moment, she was holding Clara more firmly than anyone ever had. And Clara was alive in that rhythm. Her cheeks colored. Her lips parted, just slightly. She wasn't performing. She was participating. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't being asked to stay still for the sake of others. She was being invited, wordlessly, to move for herself. The shadows grew longer on the carpet. Outside, laughter rose from the garden. But inside that room, beneath the chandeliers and beside the spotless buffet table, two people danced without music. And in doing so, made something far louder than a song. From the top of the grand staircase, Mr. Alaric Vaughan paused. His leather-soled shoes had made no sound on the polished oak, but something in the room below had caught his attention, not noise but movement. A rhythm that didn't belong. A disruption in the order of things. His expression didn't change. Not visibly. He was a man of precision, known for his silence as much as his success. He expected the world to behave the way he built it, structured, elegant, unquestioned. Nothing in his home happened without design. Especially not in that room, especially not involving Clara. A step behind him, the head butler stopped as well. Years of service had trained him to sense Vaughan's every shift in attention. He leaned slightly forward to see what the billionaire saw. Down below, in the golden light of the sitting room, a dance was unfolding. Clara and Sienna moved slowly, delicately, in near silence. Clara's arm traced the air like it had remembered something ancient. Sienna stood opposite her, a respectful distance away, her motions quiet but purposeful, guiding without leading, responding without instructing. The room, once untouchable in its symmetry, was now alive in its imperfection. The butler's voice broke the stillness in a whisper. "Should I stop this, sir?" Vaughan did not reply immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the scene below. Then, without looking at the man beside him, he lifted his right hand and gave a small wave. "No," he said. A pause. "Not yet." The butler said nothing more. Below them, Sienna moved. It was a wider step than before, her foot arced out softly in a sweeping motion, turning her body in a slow spiral. She wasn't dancing for Clara anymore. She was dancing with her. Clara attempted to mimic the step. Her wheelchair shifted slightly, unbalanced by the reach of her body. The wheel jerked. She tipped forward. Sienna reacted instantly. One swift motion, no panic, no shout. Just a precise, practiced catch. Her hands came under Clara's arms just in time, steadying her, grounding her. Clara looked up, startled. Then for a moment, everything froze. Their eyes met. Sienna's hand still lightly braced the girl's shoulders. Clara's breath caught in her throat. And then, they both smiled. It wasn't wide or showy. It wasn't a smile meant for anyone watching. It was small. Real. The kind of smile born from surviving something together, even if it was just a tip of a chair and the whisper of embarrassment. Upstairs, Vaughan stood unmoving. He had not descended the final steps. He had not spoken again. But his hand, now resting on the carved wooden banister, tightened slightly, his knuckles paling against the polished surface. He was watching something that did not fit. In his world, staff did not touch his daughter. Not casually. Not intimately. Not like this. And yet, there was no chaos. No defiance. No intention to disobey. Just a young maid with a dancer's memory, and a little girl with a silent hunger to belong to something unscripted. The maid hadn't asked for permission. The girl hadn't apologized. And Vaughan, for the first time in years, found himself choosing not to correct something wrong. Alaric Vaughan remained perfectly still. From the landing above the sitting room, he didn't blink, didn't shift his weight, didn't make a sound. But his right hand, still resting on the curved mahogany banister, had tightened, his knuckles now pale against the dark wood. Down below, Clara continued to move. She didn't know he was watching. Her face was turned upward, toward the filtered sunlight dancing across the high windows. Her right arm rose again, hesitant but rhythmic, as if answering music only she could hear. Her left side lagged behind slightly, as it always did. But she was trying. Fully present. Vaughn had seen that face before in other settings, when she was wheeled into a room full of adults who praised her posture, or when she sat silently through lessons designed to strengthen what her body refused to obey. But this was different. She wasn't performing. She was participating in something unscripted. And it was terrifying. Sienna moved again, further back now, adjusting to Clara's range. Her right foot extended delicately behind her, then landed, toe first, into a gentle grounded stance. The motion wasn't elegant. Her form was slightly off. The old injury had made sure of that. But the decision, the intention, was clear. It was a step not toward the girl, but with her. Vaughn saw it all. He wasn't a man who cried. Not at funerals, not at births, not even the day his wife left. He had built empires by keeping his emotions tightly compressed, like concrete poured into steel frames. Structure above all. Efficiency. Rules. But this was chaos disguised as gentleness. And for some reason, he didn't stop it. The hand on the railing twitched slightly. Clara twirled her hand again, her fingertips slicing the afternoon light. Her wheelchair creaked softly as she adjusted her posture, the smallest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She was moving to her own rhythm. She didn't look for permission. She didn't look for him. Vaughn's jaw clenched. He had always made sure Clara was protected. Not just physically, but emotionally. No sudden changes, no raised voices, no confusion. Everything measured. Everything safe. But now here she was, entirely unaware of him, letting someone else teach her how to step outside those lines. Not teach. Invite. He watched Sienna step again, off-center, with the unmistakable hitch of an old wound, but also with grace. She didn't reach out to Clara this time. She simply moved. Quietly. Boldly. Like she was dancing in a room that didn't belong to anyone but them. Vaughn inhaled, but said nothing. He didn't descend. Didn't clear his throat. Didn't interrupt. And the strangest thing happened. He felt time change. It wasn't the time he controlled. Schedules, flights, deals, deadlines. It was something looser, older. A tempo that refused to be held. He turned his head slightly, not enough to signal anything, just enough to feel the pressure behind his eyes shift. For the first time in years, there was moisture gathering, barely visible, but undeniable. He blinked once. Slowly. No one saw it. The butler remained respectfully out of view. Sienna never turned toward the staircase. Clara stayed with the light. Vaughn took a half step back from the railing, only a fraction. Enough to reset his balance. Enough to hide the fact that something inside him had shifted too. His face never changed. Not visibly. But something unspooled in the silence. He didn't leave the staircase. He didn't enter the room. But he stayed. 4 minutes longer than he needed to. Rooted not by obligation, but by a question he didn't know how to ask. What if this was the first time she felt free? And what did that make him? The architect of safety, or the warden of silence? Still, he said nothing. He did not allow the moment to be interrupted. And down below, the girl danced without music. The maid followed. And the man who once demanded control simply stood there, letting time pass like a melody he couldn't stop and didn't want to. The quiet broke, not from below, but beside him. The butler had remained one respectful step behind, as always. But something about the stillness, the strangeness of the moment, seemed to compel him to speak. His voice came low, just above a breath, carefully measured. "Sir, she's overstepping." Vaughn didn't move at first. His eyes remained fixed on the space where Clara and Sienna moved, not dancing anymore, but existing in some shared rhythm of breath and trust. The girl's small frame leaned ever so slightly forward, arms now resting in her lap, her eyes still locked on the maid's gentle form. Sienna hadn't left her side. She stood not like an employee, but like a witness. "Sir," the butler prompted again, more uncertain now. "She's—" Vaughn finally spoke. His voice was quiet, clear, and uncharacteristically soft. "She's helping her stand." A pause. "That's not overstepping." The words didn't land with thunder. They didn't need to. They simply shifted something. For the first time in years, Vaughn had said something that wasn't part of a schedule, a directive, a transaction. No instruction. No correction. No function. Just meaning. The butler blinked. It was rare to hear Vaughn speak at all unless it involved operations. Times, deliveries, guests, orders. But this was different. And though the old man didn't reply, he understood the signal. This moment was not to be interrupted. Down below, Sienna leaned forward slightly, hands resting gently on the armrests of Clara's wheelchair. She didn't speak. She didn't fix or adjust. She just made herself visible at the girl's eye level, present and waiting. Clara looked at her. Really looked. Then reached out, not with both hands, not with certainty, but with a small, almost weightless motion. Her right fingers touched Sienna's forearm for just a second, a point of contact so soft it might have gone unnoticed in any other room. But not here. Vaughn saw it. It was the kind of gesture his world didn't know what to do with. Too intimate. Too unrehearsed. It wasn't sanitized or rehearsed. It was real. He exhaled, not loudly, but with enough force to realize he'd been holding his breath. Somewhere deep inside the vault of his carefully composed life, something cracked, not catastrophically, but with that fine fracture that eventually changes shape. For years, he had drawn lines. Between guest and staff. Between duty and affection. Between safety and spontaneity. And above all, between Clara and risk. But now he saw, maybe that same line had also kept her from joy. He looked again. Sienna had backed up slightly, giving Clara space again. The girl's face was flushed from effort, but not stress. Her eyes shone in a way he hadn't seen in far too long. Not since before the diagnosis. Maybe not ever. And Vaughn understood something, not fully, not in words, but in a bone-deep way that didn't need articulation. This wasn't a maid breaking rules. This was a person, becoming part of Clara's world in a way no therapy session, no private instructor, no tightly structured playdate ever had. Helping her stand, yes. But also, helping her belong. The butler shifted his weight again, but didn't speak. Vaughn didn't say another word either. Because what was there to add? Definitions were changing. What was once a violation of role had become an act of grace. What once would have triggered reprimand now required reverence. There would be no staff meetings called. No schedules adjusted. No incident reports filed. But something had shifted permanently. And it started with a sentence he hadn't planned to say. That night, long after the guests had gone, and the last crystal glass had been returned to its velvet-lined drawer, Alaric Vaughn sat alone in his study. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the security monitor on his desk. The house was silent. He had sent the staff to bed hours earlier, but he remained, a tumbler of untouched scotch beside him, sleeves rolled up, jacket draped over the arm of a nearby chair. He moved the mouse. The security footage was already queued up. He clicked play. The scene came to life on screen, the sitting room, flooded with late afternoon light, Clara in her chair, Sienna opposite her, their silent exchange unfolding like a quiet revolution. He watched without blinking. He watched as Clara lifted her arm. Watched Sienna mirror her. Watched the stumble, the catch, the stillness, the smile. Then something unexpected. Clara leaned back and tilted her chin upward. Her face opened into a quiet, luminous grin, not polite, not rehearsed. It was pure. And in that frame, Vaughn saw it. He wasn't there. Not physically. Not in the camera's field of view. Not in her line of sight. She was smiling at the space Sienna occupied. Smiling with someone else. He paused the footage. Froze it at that exact moment. The image captured Clara in profile, her eyes alight with something unnameable. There was no anxiety in her shoulders. No bracing for correction. Just presence. Vaughn stared at the screen for a long time. Then he clicked the print icon. The small laser printer in the corner hummed to life, quiet and clinical. The image emerged slowly. Black and white. Matte. Still. He walked over, picked it up, held it in his hands. His daughter, happy. And he hadn't been part of it. No worse, he hadn't been needed for it. He returned to the desk and sat, staring at the photograph. For a man who had spent decades controlling narratives, market trends, legal contracts, media optics, it was a foreign feeling. To be present, yet irrelevant. He looked down at the stack of invitations on the edge of his desk. Heavy cardstock. Embossed lettering. The gala was in 3 days. The biggest names in the industry would be there. His name was printed in gold foil at the bottom of each invite. He picked up the top one. Turned it over in his hands. Then, with a movement slower than his usual decisiveness, he tore it in half. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. But intentionally. He picked up the next one. Tore that too. One by one, he went through the pile, ripping each invitation in half, then into quarters. The pieces made no sound as they fell into the waste bin beside him. When the last one was gone, he sat back and looked again at the photo. Clara, smiling. He reached for a notepad. Tore off a single sheet. Wrote carefully, in his steady, deliberate script. Thank you for not asking permission. She needed that. He folded the note in half. No signature. No envelope. Just the words. Then he placed it on the hallway table outside the staff quarters, where Sienna would find it in the morning. He stood for a moment in the dim hallway, the note resting beside a silver dish used for keys and letters. No ceremony. No acknowledgement. Just a message. Then he turned and walked back toward the staircase. His steps were slower than usual. Measured, but not for anyone else's sake. That evening, in the quiet of a house built on control, a father realized the most powerful thing he could do was not be the center of the story. And it undid him in a way nothing else ever had. Each morning now, before the house stirred and the staff began their quiet routines, Clara moved. Not always gracefully. Not always evenly. But she moved. The large sitting room, once reserved for pristine quiet and carefully placed furniture, had become her space, her studio. The rugs had been rolled back. The coffee table pushed to one side. The light spilled across the floor as it always had, but now it felt warmer somehow, more welcome. Sienna no longer demonstrated steps. She didn't guide with her hands or count softly under her breath. She sat nearby, cross-legged on the edge of the sofa, her hair pulled back loosely, eyes gentle but unintrusive. Sometimes she watched. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she simply existed beside the girl, her presence enough. Clara, now more confident in her right arm's range, twirled slowly in her chair, one palm outstretched, the other curled lightly in her lap. Her feet still didn't move the way she wished, but she had found a rhythm between what her body resisted and what her spirit insisted. She had stopped asking for music. Her movements had their own beat now. On one particular morning, the air was cooler. A breeze moved through the slightly cracked windows, carrying the scent of the garden in bloom. Vaughn stood on the balcony above, one hand resting on the railing, the other holding a small object wrapped in a cloth. He didn't speak. He hadn't for days. But he watched. Not with the scrutinizing gaze of a man monitoring progress or measuring results. It was different now. Observant, yes, but open. Uncertain, even. Not because he doubted her, but because he was finally learning to trust something he couldn't shape. After a few minutes, he turned and disappeared inside. Clara didn't notice. She was spinning, slowly, purposefully, her fingers following a pattern only she seemed to know. 20 minutes later, Vaughn returned. This time, through the main doors, stepping into the room without a word. In his hands, a vintage record player, sleek and black, worn slightly at the edges from time. It had sat unused in his personal library for over a decade. He walked to the center of the room, where Clara had paused, curious. He placed the machine gently on the floor. Not ceremoniously. Not to make a statement. Just placed it. Then he straightened, took a remote from his coat pocket, and held it out. No speech. No instructions. Just a quiet offering. Clara looked at him. Looked at the remote. Then slowly, reached out and took it. Her fingers, smaller than the device itself, hovered briefly before pressing the button. A soft crackle, then the warm hiss of vinyl. Music began. It was something old. Instrumental. Piano-led. The kind of melody that didn't demand attention but invited stillness. Sienna lifted her head. She didn't rise. Didn't perform. But something in her posture shifted, an acknowledgement, a response. Clara smiled. Not at anyone. Not for anyone. Just to herself. She lifted her arm again, twirled her chair, and let the music carry her forward. 3 beings. 1 space. No commands. No choreography. Just a girl moving. A woman witnessing. A man watching from the edge of something he once controlled, now letting go. And in that moment, Vaughn understood. He wasn't needed to lead. He was needed to let her lead herself. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let go. In a world obsessed with control, of outcomes, appearances, and even the people we love, it can be difficult to accept that not everything needs our guidance. Especially for those of us who have lived long enough to see the value of order, the cost of mistakes, and the comfort of structure, it becomes second nature to hold tightly to the reins. But the story of a father standing silently at the edge of his daughter's transformation reminds us, sometimes, the greatest act of love is to step back. Mr. Vaughn had wealth, wisdom, and authority. He had built a life around precision. But what he hadn't built, until that quiet afternoon, was space. Space for someone else to bloom, imperfectly. Space for a child to move without fear of correction. Space for a moment of joy that didn't require his permission. We often believe that by protecting others, we are serving them. And sometimes that's true. But there comes a time, especially with the young, the vulnerable, or those learning to find their own voice, when our presence must shift from director to witness. From the one who sets the rhythm, to the one who simply watches it unfold. This doesn't mean detachment. It means trust. It means honoring the sacredness of a moment we don't control. It means recognizing that someone's growth might not look like what we imagined, but that doesn't make it any less real or less worthy. In his silent gesture, handing over a remote, without a word, Mr. Vaughn gave his daughter more than music. He gave her ownership of her own tempo. He showed her that her choices, her pace, her joy mattered, even without applause. And perhaps that's the message many of us need to carry into the later chapters of life. Let us be generous not only with our wisdom, but with our silence. Let us be present not just with advice, but with attention. And when the moment comes, when we see someone move without asking, smile without needing us, stand without being held, may we find peace not in being the center, but in knowing we helped build the room they now dance in. Before you go, remember this. If someone ever danced with you, not because the music was right, but because you were finally moving. If someone once stood quietly at the door, not to join in, not to stop you, but simply to honor what was unfolding, then hold on to that. Some dances don't need an audience. Just someone who knew when not to stop them. Like and subscribe, and share this video with someone who once walked beside you, not because they were leading, but because you were finally alive.